Daniel inquired and wanted to understand what the meaning of the vision of the four beasts were. And in order to explain it even further, Yahweh gave Daniel another dream, or another vision, in order to explain it in another way. Many times we get confused when we look at the visions of Daniel and we do not understand that they actually tie in with one another, just as Daniel, the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation actually tie in with one another. In Daniel chapter 8, Daniel says, I lifted up my eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a single ram which had 2 horns, representing 2, and the 2 horns were high. And one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. So what Daniel actually sees, he sees this ram standing, having 2 horns, having one short horn and one long horn. And the short horn came up first, and the long horn came up last. Then he says in verse 4, I looked and saw the ram was pushing and charging westward and northward and southward, and no beast could stand before him, neither could anyone rescue from his power, but he did according to his own will and pleasure, and magnified himself. We see that this ram, which was standing in the east, because he was pushing westward, northward, and southward, was extending his power from out of the east. Then Daniel looked, and in verse 5 he says, As I was considering, behold, a he-goat came from the west, across the face of the whole earth, without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous and remarkable horn between his eyes. In this prophecy, Daniel sees a goat having one single horn, and this horn came jumping across the face of the whole earth without touching it. And he says he had a conspicuous and remarkable horn between his eyes. And what is very important about this vision, we see this goat jumping out of the west across the face of the whole earth. Then Daniel sees how this goat, in verse 6, he says, he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the river, and ran at him in the heat of his power. And in my vision I saw him come close to the ram, and he was moved with anger against him, and he struck the ram and broke his 2 horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but the goat threw him to the ground and trampled on him, and there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. Yahweh is showing Daniel that out of the west will come this goat that will run in the full power of his strength at a ram having 2 horns. This is actually what happened in prophecy. Out of the west, out of the Greek Empire, came a king with the name of Alexander the Great. And he came and he broke the power of the Medes and the Persians, who was in the east, who was pushing at that stage northward, westward, and southward. And he broke down this kingdom and overtook it. When Daniel inquired from Yahweh about the interpretation of the vision that he was shown, it says in verse 15, When even I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it, and then behold, there stood before me one, Gabriel, with the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the bank of the river Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man, Daniel, understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, Understand, O son of man, for the fulfillment of the vision belongs to events that shall occur in the time of the end. Now as he, Gabriel, was speaking with me, I fell stunned and in a deep unconsciousness, with my face to the ground. But he touched me and set me upright, where I had stood. And he said, Behold, I will make you know what will be in the latter time of the indignation of God upon the ungodly, for it has to do with the time of the end. The vision that Daniel saw, God makes it very clear through his angel Gabriel that this vision was a vision that was not only for Daniel's time, but it was a vision that referred to the latter time of the indignation, which points to the last days, to the last time before Israel will completely return and before Yeshua will start to reign as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. It also refers to the time of the 10 toes, when the last kingdom on the earth will finally be removed. So it was revealed to Daniel that this vision actually belonged to events that will occur right at the end. And we see how in an awesome way Yahweh revealed to Daniel what the interpretation of this dream is. And he said, and God came and told the angel to make known to Daniel, what does this vision mean? Then the angel came and gave Daniel the understanding. In verse 20 he says, the ram that you saw having 2 horns, they are the kings of the Medes and the Persians, making it very clear that this ram standing in the east were the kings of the Medes and the Persians. And the shaggy and the rough he-goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn between his eyes is the first king who consolidated the whole realm, Alexander the Great. As for the horn which was shattered, in whose place 4 other horns arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of this nation, but not having his Alexander's power. But at the latter time of the end of their kingdom, when the transgressors, or the apostate Jews, have reached the fullness of their wickedness, taxing the limits of God's mercy, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark trickery and craftiness shall stand up. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall corrupt and destroy astonishingly, and shall prosper and do his own pleasure. And he shall corrupt and destroy the mighty men and the holy people, the people of the saints. Yahweh reveals to Daniel that the ram that came, or the goat that came out of the west, is the king of Greece, which was Alexander the Great. And the first king who consolidated the whole realm, after him, when he was, his horn will be shattered, and when he is shattered, in his place will arise 4 others in his place. And then in the latter end of their kingdom, when the sin has reached its fullness, it says, there will arise a wicked king, a king of fierce countenance, understanding dark trickery and craftiness. And he will stand up, and he will corrupt and destroy astonishingly. And we will now look at how history actually was fulfilled, and how the latter end of Alexander the Great's kingdom was shattered and broken into 4 parts. Then the angel told him in verse 25, saying, and through his policy he shall cause trickery to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart and mind, and in their security he will corrupt and destroy many. He will also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken, and that by no human hand. The vision of the evenings and the mornings, which has been told you, is true. But seal up the vision, for it has to do and belong to the now distant future. And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick for several days. And afterwards I rose up and did the king's business. And I wondered at the vision, and there was no one who understood it or could make it understood. Daniel had really wrestled with God in order to understand this vision. And it was revealed to him that this king with fierce features and dark trickery will rise up in the latter time of the kingdom of the Greek Empire. And he will rise up and he will magnify himself. He will be absolutely arrogant in his own heart and mind. And he will use very deceitful ways. And he will even stand up against the Prince of Princes, which is Yeshua. But he will be broken, but not by a human hand. We know that prophecy is revealing to us that Yahweh is in control, that Yeshua is the King of Kings, and that he will finally break this wicked king, the most wicked king the earth has ever seen that is coming. Yeshua himself will break this king and his power. Many are often confused between the king, which is the long horn, and the king which will become the little horn. In the fasts in 2002, while we were praying and inquiring from Yeshua regards his purpose for our lives, he spoke to us about two people, calling one the arrogant one and later the cocky one. It took me many years to understand that there was a difference between the arrogant one and the cocky one. Now if we look at history, you will clearly see what the difference is between the arrogant one and the cocky one. This horn that grew up, which is Alexander the Great, the horn that was the single horn between the goats on the goat's head. It says in verse 8, he goat magnified himself exceedingly, and when he was young and strong, the great horn was suddenly broken or shattered. And instead of him there came up 4 notable horns, to whom the kingdom was divided, one towards each of the 4 winds of heaven. So Alexander the Great's kingdom was suddenly broken or shattered. And according to history, we know that he was either he was poisoned or he just died of natural causes. But his kingdom was broken, and he had nobody in his own bloodline to inherit his kingdom. And instead of inheriting his kingdom, his 4 generals actually inherited his kingdom. And 4 horns came up into the 4 directions of the wind. One towards the west, one towards the north, another towards the east, and another towards the south. According to historical sources, it says Alexander had no obvious or legitimate heir. His son Alexander IV, by Roxanne, after being born after Alexander's death, he left the huge question mark as to who would rule the newly conquered and the barely pacified empire. According to Diodorus, Alexander's companions asked him when he was on his deathbed to whom he bequeathed his kingdom. And his laconic reply was, to the strongest. Given that Arian and Plutarch have Alexander speechless by this point, it is possible that this is an apocryphal story. Diodorus, Curtius, and Justin also have the more plausible story of Alexander passing his signet ring to Perdiccas, one of his bodyguard and leader of the companion cavalry, in front of witnesses, thereby possibly nominating Perdiccas as his successor. So we see from historic report that it actually says that he might have said that on his deathbed that his kingdom should go to the strongest one. And finally, according to other sources, gave his signet ring to Perdiccas. But if we look at what happened in history further, we will clearly see that his kingdom was divided into 4 parts. According to historical sources, it says, "It was not long, however, before dissension and rivalry began to afflict the Macedonians. The satrapies handed out by Perdiccas at the partition of Babylon became power bases for each general from which to launch his own bid for power. After the assassination of Perdiccas in 321 BC, all semblance of the Macedonian unity collapsed, and 40 years of war between the successors ensued. Before the Hellenistic world settled into 4 stable power blocks: the Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt, the Seleucid king empire in the east, the kingdom of Pergamon in Asia Minor, and Macedon in the west. In the process, both Alexander the Fourth and Philip III were murdered." It is very clear from history that although at that time Alexander might not have specifically allowed the 4 to fight against each other and might have even appointed or have appointed Perdiccas, finally his kingdom was divided into 4 stable power blocks, each of his generals fighting each other for power. And we will now see how this will become a shadow picture of the fulfillment of prophecy in our time. It was revealed to Daniel in Daniel 8 verse 9, saying, "Out of littleness and small beginnings, one of them came forth, a horn whose impious presumption and pride grew exceedingly great toward the south, towards the east, and towards the ornament or the precious or the blessed land of Israel." So we see out of the kingdom of Macedon in the west arose a little horn or a power from littleness and yet small beginnings. And he started having this impious presumption and pride and grew exceedingly towards all the other kingdoms, wanting to overtake them. Towards the north to Pergamon in Asia Minor, towards the east to the Seleucid Empire, and towards the south and towards Israel, which is the Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt and Israel in the south. And we know from history that the one who rose up in those days to fulfill this prophecy was Antiochus Epiphanes. The angel revealed to Daniel, saying in verse 10, "In my vision this horn grew great, even against the host of heaven, God's true people, the saints, and some of the hosts and of the stars or the priests he cast down to the ground, and he trampled on them." We see how this horn, which we identify in history as Antiochus Epiphanes, broke 3 horns, one in the north, one in the east, and one in the south, completely removing them and uprooting them. This very removal of the 3 horns, both in the north, the east, and the south, will now become very important in understanding the fulfillment of prophecy that are happening and will happen in our time. The 4 kingdoms, when we look at maps of how it is actually, how the territory was divided, we see that the kingdom in the east, basically the Ptolemaic Empire, was an empire that stretched all the way from where we know today as the area of Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, all the way through into India. We know that Alexander the Great fought his wars going all the way up until India. The kingdom in the south was basically the kingdoms of the area of North Africa, which was Egypt. And if we look at the kingdom in the north, which was known as Pergamon, is basically Asia Minor, which we know today as the areas of Istanbul and Turkey, and those areas there around the Black Sea. In order for us to see it visually in front of us, we've just created this map for you so that you can see how out of Macedon in the west, the attacks from Antiochus Epiphanes, because of his impious pride and arrogance, came towards the north and where that area actually was situated, and towards the east and the entire area that was included at that time, and then also towards the south and the area that was included in that time. And we know that Antiochus Epiphanes actually came into Israel in that time, and he did a prophetic thing, fulfilling prophecy. He took a swine or a pig and he took it into the temple area and he slaughtered it on the altar, and thus defiling the altar, causing the people in Israel, the Jews, not to be able to sacrifice on the altar anymore, thus stopping the sacrifices from being made at that time. We've already seen in this seminar how prophecy was fulfilled not only on one level, but actually was fulfilled on 3 levels, as we have seen so far, and will still be fulfilled on a final level when the final kingdom will have its rulership. When we look at the time of the Roman Empire, we see the most amazing resemblance to exactly what happened in the time of Alexander the Great. The entire empire that existed from 100 before Christ until 500 before Christ, and how it grew into the Western and the Eastern Roman Empire, can be seen on the map in front of us. And we can see how the different kings started to attack and started to try to overtake the Empire of Rome. As we'll see, the white or the yellow arrows is how the Angles or the Saxons actually launched their attack. Then we look at how the orange, the Franks, launched their attacks coming out of the northern part of Europe, attacking towards the southwest. Then we see also the Goths and their movements and how they attacked towards the east, and how they also attacked downwards towards Greece and also towards Italy, and finally trying to also overtake both France, which we know today as France, and Spain. We see also how the Visigoths also attacked Rome and tried from their point of view to overtake the rest of Rome. We see how the Huns attacked out of the north, coming against the empire and broadening their empire towards the south of the Black Sea, as well as the west of the Black Sea, going more towards Western Europe. Then finally we see the Vandals, a kingdom that started also in the north and had a path of traveling all the way through Europe and finally crossing the great Gulf of Gibraltar and entered into North Africa, and from North Africa started to attack northwards again towards Italy and towards Greece and towards Spain, overtaking and extending their power and strength of their kingdom. According to recorded history, it says, with Attila the Hun's massive empire extending into the Russian plains, bounding on its borders, the Roman Empire was beginning to fall apart. during the first half of the 5th century, the Eastern Empire was holding steady, but the Western Empire was crumbling. The Ostrogoths, a fairly hostile people, had taken a firm hold of the Pannonian part of the Balkans. The Visigoths were settled in Anticythera, or the southwestern Gaul, as federates and allies of the Roman Empire. The Burgundians were settled in the northwest of the Alps as federates, and Britain had been abandoned. The Suevians settled in the northwest of Hispania, and the Franks moved across the Rhine, and the Britons descended across the sea to settle in the northwest tip of Gaul. But worst of all, the hostile Vandals had lodged themselves in the northern Africa, the Libyan and the Mauritanian territories they failed to control, falling back into the hands of native tribes. We will now see, according to this little piece of recorded history, how important it was, how these kingdoms started to invade the Western Roman Empire, making it to crumble and break down. And we will also see how this was fulfilled in prophecy, according to what Yeshua had revealed to his servant and apostle John. Again, looking at a map of where these kingdoms of the Ostrogoths, the Heruli, and the Vandals were, and how they were overtaken in those days, we see the most amazing resemblance to Alexander the Great's kingdom. We see that in the south, and also towards Israel, where we today have Libya and Egypt, the Vandals were. We see how towards the east, where the Ostrogoths were, they were living in a part that actually beset all of the area of today's Lebanon, parts of Syria, and even a part of Turkey. And then we see where the Heruli were staying in the northern part of Europe, which we today know as the areas of Romania and Bulgaria and Greece. And this was the areas which had to first be removed before the Holy Roman Empire could take its position. We will now start to see exactly what is happening in our time and what has already started happening from January 2011. And our prophecy is being fulfilled, preparing the world for the coming of the Antichrist. On the 10th of March 2002, through a sign in the heaven, Yeshua showed both of us a sign of the country of South America. Then he took Venezuela and made it into the short horn of the ram of Daniel. Then after that again he took the country of Brazil and made it into the long horn of the ram, thus having the ram with one short horn and one long horn. Then I asked my brother and I said, why Venezuela? And then my brother, who has been well traveled in the world, told me that Venezuela was part of the OPEC Alliance of Nations. Now, who is OPEC? OPEC is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, is a cartel of 12 countries made up of Algeria, Angola, Ecuador, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Libya, Nigeria, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Venezuela. The organization has maintained its headquarters in Vienna since 1965 and hosts regular meetings among the oil ministers of its member countries. In Indonesia's membership from OPEC was voluntarily suspended recently as it became a net importer of oil. Venezuela was the first country to move towards the establishment of OPEC by approaching Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia in 1949, suggesting that they exchange views and explore avenues for regular and closer communication among petroleum-producing nations. In 10 to 14 September 1960, at the initiative of the Venezuelan Energy and Mines Minister Juan Pablo Perez Alfonso and the Saudi Arabian Energy and Mines Minister Abdullah Al-Tariki, the governments of Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia and Venezuela met in Baghdad to discuss ways to increase the price of the crude oil produced by their respective countries. OPEC was founded in Baghdad, triggered by a 1960 law instituted by an American president, Dwight Eisenhower, that forced quotas on Venezuela and Persian Gulf oil imports in favor of the Canadian and the Mexican oil industries. Eisenhower cited national security, land access to energy supplies at times of war. When this led to falling prices for oil in these regions, Venezuela's president Romulo Betancourt reacted, seeking an alliance with oil-producing Arab nations as a preemptive strategy to protect the continuous autonomy and profitability for Venezuela's oil. We see that Venezuela was the originator of OPEC. And later, we see that after they approached these other nations, they also climbed on the boat. They became part of that which Venezuela initiated initially. When we now look at what Yeshua had actually shown us through signs in the heavens, we will see exactly how what he explained to us actually breaks open how prophecy will be fulfilled in these days. He showed us how Venezuela is the short horn of the ram that was standing in the east, that was pushing northward, westward, and southward. And this short horn was then followed by a long horn. And if we look at the OPEC Alliance of Nations, we will see that Venezuela was the originator of the OPEC Alliance of Nations, and later all the other nations also joined: Algeria, Angola, Ecuador, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Libya, Nigeria, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Looking at the general info of the OPEC Alliance, we can see that Venezuela joined in 1960. Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia also joined after that, when Venezuela initiated it. Then we see that Qatar joined in 1961, Libya joined in 1962, the United Arab Emirates joined in 1967, Algeria in 1969, Nigeria in 1971, Angola in 2007, and Ecuador also in 2007. We're looking at a population of nearly 369 million people that are included in the OPEC Alliance of Nations. We also know that this area is an area that is as big as the area of the European Union put together. what is even more amazing is when we compare this to the nations that are part of the Arab League of Nations, we will see that most of the nations that are part of the OPEC Alliance of Nations are also included in the Arab League of Nations. Even Venezuela have been an observer since 2006. So we see that there's a very close relationship between the Arab League of Nations and the OPEC Alliance of Nations. And we will now see how important this is in how prophecy will be fulfilled in the last days. In the following chart, we can clearly see all the nations that are part of the Arab League of Nations. Since 1945, the Arab League of Nations had its existence, starting with Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and Syria on the 22nd of March. After that, Yemen joined in 1945, Libya joined in 1953, Sudan joined in 1956, Morocco and Tunisia joined in 1958, Kuwait joined in 1961, Algeria joined in 1962, the United Arab Emirates joined in 1972, Bahrain and Qatar joined in 1971, Oman as well as Mauritania joined in 1971, Somalia joined in 1974, Palestine joined in 1976, Djibouti joined in 1977, the Comores joined in 1993, Eritrea became an observer since 2003, Brazil became an observer since 2003, Venezuela became an observer since 2006, and India became an observer since 2007. All that Yeshua had revealed to us, he reveals all these nations and how all of these nations will work together to form a mighty army coming up out of the east against Israel and against the king that will be in Israel at that time. And we will see in the rest of the seminar how all that Daniel has prophesied actually will find its fulfillment or its final fulfillment in these last days through these nations in the east. Thus we have a ram having two horns, one, the short horn, being Venezuela, but the long horn being either the rest of the OPEC Alliance of Nations or even more extended than that, the Arab League of Nations. We've always said that if there is a common enemy, people might not fight, they might not be working together, but they will fight together if there is a common enemy. And as soon as we look at the Arab League of Nations, we know that they have one common purpose. Most of them are Muslim, and some of them have oil, and some of them and most of them hate what the West is doing against them. So thus we are preparing a alliance of people that will stand together in the last days in order for Yeshua to fulfill his wrath and accomplish all that he had prophesied through all the prophets. On the 5th of March 2002, I had the most amazing dream. In my dream, I saw a goat that was coming out of heaven having two horns. And the goat was coming out of heaven and it made something like a S kind of shape as it was flying out of heaven. It came and stopped right in front of me, and it had two grey horns. The left horn grew larger and higher, and then from between the horns came another little horn, looking like a secret agent, who had his hair cut in a flat-top fashion, and this man looked like an important military official that was very influential and who moved in high-ranking circles. And while I looked, the horn changed and became many men looking like they were conferring together. And I saw among them the stern-looking secret agent. as I had this vision and this dream immediately reminded me of how 10 kings would actually give their power to one man, the beast, which is the little horn which Daniel speaks about. And through this dream, Yeshua is revealing that Satan, coming out of heaven, falling like lightning from heaven, will come and bring forth this secret agent, which is a very high-ranking official and moves in very high circles, and how he will come forth and become the Antichrist.